Chapter 4. Blind Willie Shall Play on the Fiddle. The bed was a cold, empty scene of ragged blankets and poisoned undersheets when Dolly came back to the room above the vinegar store at 10:30 that morning. Moss's massive boots and harsh coat were gone. The empty gin bottle lay on its side by the skirting of the room. Dolly carelessly shifted the position of the wood slats that had long failed to imitate the forgotten shreds of glass that had deserted the sole window, and soothed the meaningless stretch of threadbare calico that excused the lack of curtain at one edge. In vain she teased the tallow-tinted coverlet to reach more than two corners of the mattress, then smoothed the single bolster pillow into a central spot, though maybe more generously into the direction away from her own. Was it some curious feminine instinct that made her behave this way? Certainly before Moss had entered her life she paid no more attention to the details of this room as a she-cat to the spittoon-shadowed corner of the tap-room of the Flying Horse at midnight. Now she pined for the chance to bring order and even cleanliness to these four dead walls, even in the knowledge that they would never be more than a convenience of abject tiredness and gin-smeared lust, a seasonal escape beyond the misery of hunger and deprivation that was forever braying at its bare door. The grate had not suffered a fire for nearly a week. The blackened pot was still stained within from a broth of her own making last Friday evening. The plates, too, bore the remnants of a forgotten meal, and she suddenly urged to scour them dryly with a cast-off cloth, though without result. Of a sudden she took up the cracked bucket in her strongest hand and with a determined lope headed for the pump at mid-side, which she straightway saw from a distance was busy with women and high-pitched children at this mid-morning. Dolly was a familiar face on the quayside, but the womenfolk were wary of her. They had heard their men talking of her singing voice, of her barroom manner, and the sight of her squint and warped gait only added to her reputation. She was a curiosity and carefree spirit among a breed of women yoked by brutal men and the harsh servitude of childbirth and domesticity in this most caustic of neighbourhoods. She found herself ignored and pariah-like as she joined the plague of maternal spite at the pump site, a sharp retort for the scent of womanliness she had wallowed in only minutes before. She watched these females with a remoteness that comforted her. Their drooping maternalism, their slow sagging bodies and worn-out expressions transcended her own obvious physical deficiencies to the point of reassurance. Despite everything, she could feel Moss's wide hands across her thigh, his breath in her mouth, and felt a pride that she could finally invoke such reactions in a man. "Take the hand of a blind man," sounded a familiar voice at her ear. Dolly's reveries melted away. Willie Purvis, the blind fiddler, was padding ignored through busy clumps of workers and gossipers at the entry to Milk Market, on his daily path from All Saints' Poorhouse to the first of several quayside pubs. He was tolerated in them all except the Three Indian Kings, where songsters of a more scholarly temperament met on occasion to boast about their latest works of significance. The fever of song-making and verse-writing was at a new pitch in this town, with both poet and printer vying with each other for attention and plaudits. In the midst of all this, a ragged minstrel like Willie was an embarrassment and a nuisance in their haughty eyes, and they objected to his constant bowing and scraping and wailing in the barroom, while they spoke of grander things in the tap-room next door. Since their first meeting years before, Dolly was well known to Willie, at least by voice. She called to him across the street. "Go canny off the step there, Willie, and mind the ruts in the road." Willie's head spun around in her direction. "Dolly, me flower," he cackled. "Did you say ruts or rats? I'm wary of the first and bolden of the latter. Which is it to be?" "Hard your horses," Dolly replied with mock scorn in her voice. "I'm coming to get you." The women at the water watched her go, their heads slanted towards each other in whispered contempt. As Dolly reached him, Willie held out his arm. She took it with her own weaker one, and Willie sang at the sky. "Dolly, Dolly, Dolly, the Dillen Doll, Dolly, Dolly," over and over again as they walked. Dolly smiled to herself. He had first put a tune to her name years before, when she would meet him daily as she waited for the coming of the organ grinder at Rome's entry. It was almost the tune that the dark-skinned organ grinder played all day long, a strange foreign melody, neither sad nor happy, but bold and strong, and too queer to warrant much in the way of farthings or popular appeal. Dolly had taken with it, though, and it held her spellbound for hours as she huddled in the doorway of Lana's glass workshop, day after solitary day. Those had been bleak times. Orphans now, she and Bertha had been living in a garret high above Leamington Gut near the old theatre. Bertha had found work as a quayside shaver alongside a group of older women whose costs were as keen as their razors, but who needed a pretty lass to attract more custom. One of those that had found Bertha too hard to resist was a balloted militiaman called Heppel, who now had an afternoon grip on the girl's time when her morning's bristle work was done. He had hours to kill also between pre-noon muster and evening patrol, so an understanding soon developed. In time he would coax Bertha westwards, when he eventually secured an overseas job at the old Roman quarries at Acomb. Their courtship in the meantime was long and heartfelt, snatched at odd hours, dictated by duty and by clandestine opportunity. This had often left Dolly at a loss for company and occupation. She wandered the chairs and entries around the wheat market in St. Nicholas Square, peering into grimy windows, marvelling at women of fashion and men of long gait, pining over bakers' benches and sweetmeat stalls, and meeting the bold, bad and beautiful characters who haunted the same cobble as her. Blind Willie had emerged one cold morning from Clapham and Gilpin's apothecary in Silver Street as Dolly stared through the yellow glass of the frontage too near to the door. Willie had walked into her with a smack and an oath, and had recognised her voice when she offered an apology. "Dolly, is that?" he said. "Little Dolly, Bertha's Dillen's sister?" "Aye, it is. You surprised me stranding out like that into the public street." Willie chuckled. "I'm long since past surprises of that nature," he said. "But if it's a bubbly, busy public I'm facing, after a bumping like that, the least you can do is to walk me to the quay." And so the pair of them had set off through the alleys, avoiding the hurrying crush of the morning activities, Willie's ever-present fiddle in a leather bag over his shoulder. The organ grinder's tune rang through the passages and lanes in the eerie echoes and swirls as they got closer. "Dolly, dolly, dolly, oh," Willie trilled with it mockingly, merrily. "Dolly, Dillen, dolly, oh," he went. The girl was flattered by the rhyme, despite the stain of Dillen, runt, that it contained. She slowed down to listen as they approached the corner where the man churned out the tune, but Willie pushed at her harshly. No, I'm not giving him here," he moaned irritably. "That's not respectable music. There's no skill in that. The carter's bitch could give as good as that. If you need music to listen to, I'm the only man for the task." "But I can't go into a pub rooms and salons to listen to you," Dolly retorted. "If you think yourself too good for the street, then you're too good for the likes of me." Willie was amused. "Why, I'm singing to you now, lass. Doesn't that tell you how good you are in my blind old eyes? You have your very own song. There's not many that can say that now, is there?" And off he went again as they turned into Pandon Gate. "Dolly, dolly, Dillen, dolly," he sang, clutching her limp arm ever more tightly. Time had been fair to them. Dolly was a woman now, but the years had made little impression on Willie's squat body and wide-lined face, and only a whitening of what was left of his hair betrayed the passing of time. He had first heard her sing in the Bunch of Grapes on Side one mid-week evening several winters ago, but had passed no comment as to her worth. She sensed a wariness about him when he was in earshot of a compliment handed to her by some boozy admirer, and a whiff of jealous competitiveness sometimes soured the air between them. She understood this intuitively. Poor Willie had been blind, probably from birth, people said, and had struggled to an age when his talent with word and melody was his sole saviour, his meal ticket, and the foundation of his position in this soiled society. His lack of a sense so essential and taken for granted by all others drove him to talk louder, more often, more outrageously than needs be, and any perceived threat to his place as songster-in-chief pricked more than his pride. It wounded his sense of survival. Dolly respected this, and indeed respected the man himself. She had been touched only a few weeks earlier when he had unexpectedly laid his hand on her wrist at a bay-soaked table and offered her a song. "Do you know Sir Feldhinny?" he said softly. "You'll never hear me singing it for public. It's a beauty of a song to listen at, but a devil of a tune to hold on to. But I reckon it's fit for you. Listen up now." He leaned over to her and crooned softly at her, in a voice that she and no one else had ever heard him use, a tender keening, smooth around the verse, and then leaping at the top of the tune when it eventually came. Over and over he sang it, mesmerising the girl and eventually exhausting himself. "Sir Feldhinny," he sang, "Sir Fjeld no, Sir Feldhinny, since I ken thou." The words sounded more than ancient, the melody from another world. The words were a man's, but the tune was a woman's. Willie's rendition filled Dolly's head and heart. She sang it later that night alone on the banks of the Tyne, but had yet to give it a public platform. The water bucket still empty in her hand, Dolly left Willie at the door of the Flying Horse and wandered back to her room. The thirst for cleaning and homemaking had abated in her, and the burden of hunger and a need to feed her man had replaced it with a vengeance. As she turned into the entry, a blustery rain began suddenly, and a grimy-looking stallholder was struggling with a canvas sheet to cover his meagre wares from the downpour. Dolly loped towards the scene and with keenness and dexterity grabbed the loose end of the cover and succeeded in stretching it over the contents of the cart. The man tucked it in as a smiling Dolly stood expectantly by. "Well, I'll be champion now," she said. "Good job I was passing." He scowled at her and reluctantly picked up a leek, examined it, changed it for a smaller one, and threw it towards her. "Thank you," she said, feigning gratitude. "That's no good to you now, is it?" she added, pointing to an onion that she'd managed to nudge off the edge of the cart in the excitement. "It's got horse shite on it, you can't sell that." She pushed it towards a patch of manure with her foot before he had the chance to lower himself below the shaft to see the cart. "I'll try rinsing it, but I doubt that'll fattle. Anyway, the rain stopped. The leek and the onion were in the bucket, and she was away, and the vegetables were soon joined by a gutted fish that she spotted out of Gull's view beneath a bonded kilo on the nearby wagon way. It was past noon. She would get water, set a fire in the grate for boiling a stew, and eat with Moss in the hour between his return from the ballasts and her leaving for work at dusk. Moss was working in the biker cut, where the colliers dropped spill to suit the tidal river. 3 children carts were allocated twice a year to skim back the thick of the river spoil to ward against the build-up of silt and sand, and clear a good draught for the ever-wary collier brigs in their journey to meet the keels. Moss had been with a 3-man team, enjoying a leisurely pace for the last 3 weeks. It also brought him home early each day. Dolly had washed her face in the last of the water, pulled a weaver's rake through her hair and pinned it, and was wearing a shawl at an angle to fill the crook in her weak shoulder when she heard a wholesome cough and spit at the foot of the stairs. Moss stooped in through the doorway. He noticed her efforts to soothe this one tired eye towards a beauty that she feared she would never possess, but that he saw plainly. He smiled and uttered something she couldn't understand, but sensed it was fondly meant. Without taking off his jacket, he fell on the bed with a long groan of exhaustion. She moved towards him and sat almost primly at his side. Head back, she laid his heavy fingers instinctively on her knee. "Is there food?" he asked. "Some fish in a broth," she said apologetically. "I've wages to get tonight, so there'll be more tomorrow. And drink if you want it." "No, you keep your money for yourself now," he said, fighting off weariness. "I'll have money. I will buy you things. Food, we can always find food. Special things, that's more important." "Food is more important," she laughed, "for strength, for those working hands, and for the insides, for—" He placed his hand over her lips. "I have to go out tonight to talk about a job, a special job, to guide a sculler down to the North Bay, on Sunday, early. I've done this before, so I think I will do it once more. For 3 shillings, I think." Dolly pulled back slightly. "Are you stealing it? Is that why they're paying you so much?" she asked wearily. No, not that," he said. "It's the business of Turnbull, but not the horseman. And there's no what do you say for that? No extra money?" "Tax?" Dolly asked. See, tax, the same thing, that's why." "But there's always tax," Dolly said. "That's what keeps the horsemen and the clerks warm and fed while we worry and drink our food in stews, not chew it in meat. And you could lose your job if you're found to be going against the horsemen, or worse." "No, not all that. Not a worry for you," Moss groaned. "It is nothing, only a favore, you know that. And yes, he sat up and faced her. You can sail with me. That'll be possible, and from the river you will see things, all the towns and churches, and all the splendid things that only the marinario and stink of keelmen see. You too will see it." "No, a woman can't set foot in a boat, you know that," she hissed, taken aback by the suggestion. "That could never be." Yes, in Genoa, the wives, the daughters, they live together on the long barges and balcony, even the schooners. Yes, it'll be an advantage." "No," she almost shouted. "Come, it'll be a magical adventure. You will wear my jacket. You will be a man for the day. No woman before will have such an adventure. You will be a hero for the whole day." Dolly stopped herself. This man could be childlike and wild at times. She let the conversation crumble into tiredness and walked to the window. She stared out through the gloom of crooked roofs and twisted alleys to where a bare mast or two reached up from where she knew the river lay. Such a thing could never be, she said to herself.